As I mentioned in last week's video, I'm going to discuss some drought planning. So we came home from vacation and it was extremely dry. It was, when we left, it was, it was getting dry, but when we came back, it was definitely dry. So we're going to cover some multi-point topics on how we prepare for drought and what we do about it here at the homestead on a small scale. So we've been grazing animals of some variety on nothing but grass for about the past 7 years now. And one thing we've noticed that's pretty much always true where we are in Pennsylvania is that you can guarantee that we're going to have a dry summer. For a good month we typically expect to go without having any sort of meaningful rainfall. This year it came kind of late. We're getting into pretty deep into September now, and this is the time of year, after early August, mid-August is when you're starting to plan for your winter stockpile. And now that this is when the dry period is hitting, it hurts us pretty good. So we're implementing some of our drought conditions, or our drought planning. What we're going to go over in this video is how to monitor to know whether or not you're entering into a dire situation with drought conditions, and then also what to do during the drought as far as managing your livestock and making sure that you're not destroying your pasture for the sake of keeping them fed, and then some creative solutions that can be implemented to get through the drought, and then future and planning for future years as well. All right, one of the first things to do is obviously to monitor your situation. Keep abreast of any rain or lack of rain in the forecast. Know what your conditions are with your particular forage base. So in our situation, I can walk the pastures on a fairly regular basis. Probably about every 2 weeks or so is more than enough. Just because with us, we can go about 2 weeks without having rain before our clay-dominated soils are going to show an impact from drought conditions. So as you can see, I'm standing kind of in a transition point between a pasture that has more cover versus a pasture that has been overgrazed. This particular area isn't so much a pasture for us anymore as much as it is a laneway, but it kind of gives you an idea that you need to be monitoring the recovery of where you're grazing for drought planning. You can then compare the amount of days of forage that you have left with your anticipated recovery rates for those pastures to see if you're going to be chasing grass, or if you still have plenty of leeway in that plan. And that that's based on the number of pastures you have and the amount of time that it takes for those pastures to recover based on your grazing approach. By keeping your forages higher, you can have shorter recovery periods. Whereas if you're going to graze and have overgrazing like it is behind me here, that's going to take significantly longer to recover. There are very formal processes that you can use to measure and estimate for the amount of grazing days that you have left. You can get sticks, you can do circles. There's all sorts of different avenues available for doing that estimate. What I've come to after several years of experience at this point is I can look at a field and get an idea based on how many head I have, how long they will stay in that pasture without too much complaining or belly aching. So that's the way that I do it, but there are tools available like grazing sticks and all sorts of methods to actually do like a scientific estimate of the amount of pasture that you have available for your livestock.
An Oreo likes willows.
Check out what they did to the tree I cut down yet.
What do you think, Archer?
They're attacking it.
trees are.
So you've determined that you're in a drought. Now what? So one of the first topics to discuss is tree fodder. Behind me here you'll see a weeping willow. Weeping willow is a good tree to discuss for tree fodder. And what I mean by tree fodder is a tree that you can drop where the cows or livestock will eat the leaves off of the tree in replace of, you know, grasses and forbs that would grow in a pasture. So willows are a great option. Maple is another great option for the same reason you and I like maple syrup. The cows or livestock like that sugary flavor in maple leaves. There are other options as well. You want to do some research for your specific species to determine what is safe and what would be a good forage fodder crop. But all that to say, the point of a tree fodder tree is to drop it, to cut it. And there are different ways you can do that. I forget which one's which, but pollarding is one, coppicing is another, and a third one, which actually does not kill the tree, at least not all the time, is by hinge cutting. Hinge cutting is very popular amongst the hunting community to create additional habitat down low for the deer to hide in, as well as providing them with food. And it can also help accomplish some goals that you may have with your local woodlot and your forestry plan. So those are some things to consider as it pertains to tree fodder for drought planning for a small farm livestock operation. I ran some quick numbers, and roughly we would spend about $800, a little bit more than $800 on hay per month in the winter. So anything that we can do while we still have a chance to get rain or get growth to extend the green forage for the cows, for the livestock to eat going into winter, saves us money in our pocket and helps to improve our net profit at the end of the year. As far as planning for tree fodder situations, our particular trees right now are in our lowland areas because their willows are known for being water-loving trees, so they need more water. However, they can be planted out in pasture. We'll get into Silvopasture plantings in a few minutes here, but just know that you can design it intentionally for like a sacrifice area, or you can integrate it within your system out in your pastures as well. One of the first methods I want to talk about came kind of naturally to our farm. I didn't realize it was really necessarily a special thing until we actually had Austin Unruh before he was part of Acres USA and doing these conferences and stuff. We were one of the first places that he did a Silvopasture event at, and we were walking around our farm and he was pointing out all these different techniques that I was using to help to manage not only the farm but feed our livestock and everything like that. And some of those practices of course include coppicing and pollarding our trees and our brush. When I started it, I really was just focused on trying to reduce the amount of brush that was on our farm. I've been spending probably the past 5 years cutting back trees and brush to put in our perimeter fence that I've made some videos about here on YouTube. So the initial incentive wasn't to save money and improve the forages for the livestock. It was actually just to clean up the farm and to move in a direction that we wanted to go with getting our fencing installed. And one of those things, now that I have a lot of that done out on the edges of our pasture, I'm down here in our lowlands where normally when it's wet or wet enough, we would have water running through here, just a little stream that flows out from our pond, and it provides the moisture where these Austrey willows will thrive. So we've actually planted, if I pan you around here, we have actually live staked. Austrian willows are like a hybrid willow variety, and we've actually live staked quite a few to expand the tree forage or tree fodder availability. So what I've done, and now of course it might be behind or out of camera, but the bigger ones behind me, the Austrian willows, they were about half as high as they are now when we first moved here in 7 years ago. A couple years ago, we ended up starting the experiment with these, and I basically flush cut one of the entire mature Austrian willows over there to see what it would look like as it comes back. Because one thing we do really like about these is it's a visual barrier. It provides a little bit of sense of privacy to the farm against the main road there behind us. But we're adding to this planting, knowing that we are restricting the amount of tree crop that we have available to us in other parts of the farm. So this is kind of becoming a bit of a central location for our drought planning strategy. But yeah, essentially the practice is to just cut above the browse height of the cows, and they will end up eating the leaves. Willow is a particularly good species to do this with because willow is very nutritious for the animal, and the cows really like it. When we did this a few years ago, we had sheep. The sheep also very much enjoyed having access to the willow. I suspect part of the noise and the complaining that the cows are giving me right now is because they're getting a little thin in pasture availability in here, which is another component to the strategy. When you don't have rain, the plants start to slow down their growth, and as they slow down their growth, you want to slow down your rotation, your movements, to let you buy some more time. But the other side of that is the way that we've been grazing up to this point, we have plenty of residual in our pastures to allow that vegetation to catch that dew. Having that morning dew, especially as you go into fall, provides the moisture necessary for the plants to at least get by and maintain some degree of forage quality. That couldn't have gone better if I scripted it. Probably would have screwed up somehow, but as soon as it got dropped, the cows started moving in. It's like they know. That's what happened with our sheep as well. They get trained to the noise of the chainsaw when you do stuff like this, and they'll come running. This is the first time I think that I've done it with these cows. One thing to note while I'm looking at it, I did intentionally leave a branch there for the tree to get a jump start back up in growth next spring. I cut that one down specifically just because it was getting a bit big, and we're right next to these high voltage power lines, which is a main line that that serves this area of the county. But yeah, that's definitely making the cows happy, and this will help supplement the forage that they're still getting in here. But I'm gonna go ahead and get some more cut down. An important piece to keep in mind if you're using tree fodder for forage is making sure that you don't cut too much. So I know the cows still have plenty of other stuff to eat in here. I don't want to overdo it with cutting down too much at one time. So I just dropped a couple of those little ones, and then that one big one for tonight. I still have probably 3 or 4 big ones on this side of those clumps. There's I think 7 total Austrian willow bases, and each one has multiple branches stemming off from it. So I have like 3 or 4 others, trunks that I want to cut down. What you see here is in these tubes are trees that we have planted with the intention of having a silvopasture type environment for our livestock. These are our oldest plantings, but not necessarily our biggest at this point. It just depends on the species, but this provides that shade that I was talking about. And then in future years, depending on the species, we would be able to cut the trees down for fodder. So we plant them extra close so that in the future we can have management decisions, because you can't go back in time and plant a tree. So we plant them close together early, and we have some loss. That happens. And then, you know, in 5-10 years or whatever, when we have another drought, we can then make that decision about whether or not to harvest that tree. But another thing to keep in mind with silvopasture plantings is that you don't just have fodder trees as an option. You can also plant trees like apples and honey locust with the pods, persimmons, anything like that, that provides a mast as well, oak trees even with acorns, depending on your livestock species. Those are all good options to also improve your resiliency during drought conditions by providing a tree crop, not necessarily a tree fodder, but a tree crop. So that would be another option if you go this route. Just know that this route is probably your longest time horizon, so it's going to take your longest to get the benefit of, but it will provide the biggest returns in the long run. So droughts imply heat, although it's not always a guarantee that a drought is during the summer. Another way to help manage, it's not necessarily a mitigation methodology directly, but another method that can assist during drought conditions is providing shade to your livestock. Shade is a kind of like an animal welfare type approach to it, but it also helps reduce the stress on your animals, so it reduces the amount that they need to eat as well by keeping them cool. So another thing to consider along with your tree fodder is adding some shade trees as well. The more permanence of like a tree row for shade purposes would be that it's also going to break up those winds. So windy conditions are known to pull moisture out of the ground and out of the vegetation even faster. So having those shade trees helps contribute to reducing some of that moisture loss due to wind. So something to consider there as well. On the subject of our silvopasture plantings, you'll notice that they kind of are on lines. What we did is we implemented keylines for our farm, and this is another drought management mitigation technique that it does take a good bit of effort, but depending on your soil types and your conditions, you can see pretty quick returns from keylining. So you can get a subsoiler plow to help lift any hard pans that you have. And then what we do is we also, in addition to that, we take a bottom plow, like an old moldboard plow, and flip over the soil to create essentially like a speed bump. And then we create drive-throughs for our lanes that are kind of like vernal ponds for the water to collect in. But the idea is that in your valleys, your keyline is slightly uphill compared to your ridges. So in these troughs that you create, these little swales, the water will actually move from what is typically your wettest area back to your drier ridges. So that helps by keeping the water, when it does rain, on your farm as long as possible. Because you never know, when you get into a drought, you never know when your last rain is. So keeping that water here as long as you can is a good practice to help mitigate the effects of a drought. To go along with the keyline discussion, one thing you could implement is ponds. It's not applicable to our situation here because our pond is too low in elevation, but if you are planning like a keyline design system and you're able to build a pond, build it as high up in the elevation as you can, and then you can use those keylines to distribute the water down through the rest of your property to help provide water in times of need. You would you could potentially set it up so that you intentionally drain your pond, not necessarily the whole way for the aquatic life, but you can provide some drainage out of the pond through your pastures to provide water during dry seasons as well. Something to consider. The further up in elevation that you put a pond or a water catchment system, you have the benefit of gravity, but you also have the benefit of it's less expensive to do it that way, because you're looking at a smaller catchment area for that pond. So you can implement a smaller pond to begin with, so it's not as expensive as putting a pond at your lower elevations that have a larger catchment area and more stormwater runoff considerations. Part of the pasture management approach that we are taking for these dry conditions that we're going through right now, what you're looking at here is there on the left, that pasture was grazed about 5 days ago, and the one here right in front of me about 4 days ago. By leaving this much residual, one, as we go into the fall, you're going to start getting dew in the morning. Dew is going to get captured on that vegetation, whereas if you have an area, say for example this laneway, there's not as much vegetation here, so it is not capturing as much moisture as what we can capture out here where we still have vegetation. So that vegetation will grab that moisture, and that moisture can help keep the grass in a good cool state for growing even during a dry condition. And it'll also recover significantly faster once the rains do start to come back. So we're not putting too much pressure on our pastures right now, waiting for the rains to return. For those that have been watching for a little while now, know that we move our animals quite a bit, and that's probably the most important component to drought planning is frequent movements. We are set up where most of our paddock sizes are 2-day stays. Some of them, like these here right behind me, they're smaller, so we get about 1 day out of these. But making sure that we keep enough residual, like I was saying earlier, to catch that dew. And the cows do a pretty good job of telling me when it's time for them to move. Usually I'm a little bit late just because it's a part-time thing for us right now, so it's not super critical that we're optimal, like 100% efficient, but what's left behind is what allows the dew to catch, and then it also allows the grasses to grow back faster. Not necessarily, the grasses don't necessarily catch up after a drought once the rains come, but it would take a lot longer for them to recover if you were to graze it extremely low. So we have, it's been a while since I counted, but I think somewhere in the neighborhood of about 60 different paddocks on our 30, we have a 30-acre farm, but only maybe 18 to 20 of those acres are actually in our grazing rotation. So we have that broken up somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 paddocks for me to manage, as far as where the animals are at any given time. And I keep track of that on a chart to say, how long have they been in this paddock, and what time of year. So I can look back at the history of my grazing over the past, 7 years or so, and see that typically what we do, especially with cows, we're hitting each pasture about 5 to 7 times per calendar cycle. So I feel like that's pretty good. That includes spreading out some of the winter grazing as well, because what we try to do in winter is leave a little bit of green throughout the entire winter months, so then we'll move the hay around as we move the cows around, so they keep getting the vitamins from green grasses throughout the winter. So one of the important reasons as to why you have lots of pastures and set up lots of breakpoints in your fields is to allow the pastures to grow back. This particular pasture, it's fully grown back. As you can see, most of these most of these blades of grass are completely grown back. They have their point. They've regrown. They're almost knee high at this point. That's a pretty good sign that it's getting recovery and rest. It's been about 2 months since we've been in here with our animals, so it's not as affected by the drought because it's covering the soil and preventing it from getting dried out by the hot sun. But yeah, this is ready to graze. It is premier grass considering our conditions. So it's nice to be sitting on this as well. So I'm not nearly as worried as other people that may already have to feed hay. We've seen that even in the summer where people stock their animals and they're feeding hay already, whereas we're sitting here, with extremely less pastures, and we're just trying to buy more time to allow those rains to come to recover some of the pastures that are in need of that recovery and then rest. Item number 3, topic number 3, would be woodlots, or not necessarily, they don't necessarily need to be woodlots, but areas that are maybe not as convenient or as easy to hit in your normal grazing rotation or management plan. For us, that's this side hill here by our pond. We had this cleared a few years ago when we had our pipe put in for the pond, and then I've since used like pigs and other animals to help to, one, maintain it to some degree, and two, continue to clear that way into the woods. So we have maybe 1.5 acres, 2 acres of woods right here along this hill. It's kind of steep. The brush is starting to grow in. My plan originally before this dry spell was to get the animals in here for the winter and feed hay in here and hit it really hard to knock them back, because I have weed-eated this a couple of times. It's not fun. I would prefer to use animals wherever I can. So my plan is, after I run out of Austrey willows to graze, I'm going to throw them in here to graze in the woods for a while. And our Dexters do pretty good at eating brush. They're not goats. They're not going to eat the woody fibrous stuff, but they will defoliate whatever they get access to, if they like it, or so long as it's not in too much of an abundance. So this will be another avenue that we can take for helping to address our current dry conditions. I don't have any immediate plans to do this with our cows, but what I used to do with our flock of sheep was set up netting going around the area here with our garden and our orchard and let them basically graze the lawn. But I don't think that's in the cards right now. It could be, but it would give them access to not only the lawn, but the area here around our tunnels and weeds and stuff like that. What we did when we did it with sheep is we would close up our tunnels so that they couldn't get into it, into the areas that we didn't want them, or to damage the tunnels as well. That would be a concern. But not planning on doing that at this point. If things get worse, could it happen? I'm not going to rule it out, but I don't really foresee that happening as easily with cows as we did it with sheep. But at the end of the day, if you're out of grass, you still need to feed hay. Just do what we like to do when we feed hay is we bale graze out on pasture, so then the residual is already going to be beneficial out on the pasture. We don't feed hay in the barn here unless we absolutely have to. And we're not even set up for it. Even when it snows, we're not feeding hay in the barn. Unless it's a deep snow, then we will end up feeding hay in here. With hay supplementation, you want to start it before you run out of grass. You want to try to keep a cover on your pastures so that it has a chance to regrow. Cows were getting quite noisy there in the barn. But if you're heading into winter and you've already had your hard frost or two frosts in a row that dies back your pasture, then you're not as subject to overgrazing your pastures. So it could be a situation where you could just keep grazing until you run out, essentially, and then start feeding your hay. What we do is we try to extend the green grass all the way through winter because it has good vitamins and minerals that you may not be able to get as high a concentration with hay. So we will make sure that they at least get some green grass the whole way through winter, even if it's just a little bit to supplement the hay that we provide to them. Another point for drought mitigation is what your pasture consists of. We don't spray anything on our pastures. We let the cows, the livestock, dictate to us what they consider a weed to be. And the only thing that I have to do mechanical clipping for at this point is multiflora rose. So by having that diversity in your pasture, you have different plants that can send roots down deeper to where there's moisture and other minerals, and they'll pull that up to the surface for reintegration into your topsoil layer. So having those deep-rooted plants allows you to potentially have more grazing ability throughout dry conditions. So like I've pointed out previously, I believe, our cows even eat Japanese stiltgrass, which is something that, according to expert grazers, animals don't eat. But I've seen our sheep in years past, pigs, cows all eat Japanese stiltgrass. Just yesterday they were on a pasture that was probably getting to the point where it was dominant just because of the dry conditions that we've been in, because I guess Japanese stiltgrass does not need as much moisture as some of the other more native grasses that are available in our pastures. So it's not something that we clip. It's not something that I worry about, because when push comes to shove, our cows and our livestock will eat it. So a weed is not necessarily what you define. It's let your animals define what a weed is. So those are the three main principles that we use to help manage dry conditions on our small farm. I'd be interested to hear if anyone out there has anything to add to that, because it's always good to add tools in the toolkit. We get along pretty well. Our dry seasons never really last more than a month or two. 2 months would be pretty extreme. If it were to go that long, we would probably end up feeding some hay before completely running out of grass, and certainly before setting back the pasture. One thing I didn't mention, at least not directly, I did mention that we were selling a couple of cows. We had a neighbor that was interested, and I've kind of been pondering it. Part of the reason, unfortunately, is the IRS rules requiring farms to show a profit every few years. They don't seem to understand that when you start a new operation, like especially cows, it takes 3 to 4 years just to be able to start producing beef. So we made the decision to sell off some animals, which is one of the more common, I guess, approaches to managing dry conditions, is to reduce your numbers, to reduce the demand that you're asking of your pastures. So that's always an option as well. Not necessarily something that was planned for us, like I said, but it fit with what we were doing this year. So we're happy to also have that option available as well going into fall. Here in a few more weeks, we'll have the opportunity to move some head off the farm. We've already received the deposit and everything's good to go. We've worked with the neighbor before, so it's really awesome to be able to spread our genetics locally and build partners with other Dexter producers. So cutting some more of these Austrian willows is what my week's gonna look like to manage the cows during this dry period, and pray for rain, and hopefully we can get some wet conditions to follow us back from the beach. From last week's video, we had a couple days of rain at the beach, and lo and behold, the entire time we were there it was dry here. So we're prepared for it and just taking the actions that we set out when we got into livestock. One of the first things is, planning for the less than desirable times of year, and try to return as much money and keep the net profit of our operation as high as we can, and manage our farm as best as we can. So I'd be interested if anybody else out there has other suggestions or ideas. The tree forage idea is one of the main drivers for planting trees in the pasture, because it gives us options like this to get by when things are not necessarily ideal, and it also those also provide shade. So, but that'll be it on this week's video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, especially this week. Comment. I want to know what the other people are doing, see if I miss anything. Thanks for watching. Take care.